A woman left her baby at a church, but 20 years later, a priest revealed a shocking truth.
The night was bitter cold, the kind that sank into your Erie, Pennsylvania, rarely saw anymore, not since the steel mills shut down and left the town to rust. On Elm Street, where the street lamps flickered like they were too tired to stay lit, a woman in a hooded jacket moved quickly through the shadows. Her breath puffed out in sharp bursts, visible under the faint yellow glow. In her arms, she clutched a wicker basket, the kind you'd see at a flea market, lined with a threadbare blanket. Inside, a baby slept, tiny fists curled against its cheeks, oblivious to the world it was about to enter. The church loomed ahead, a squat brick building with chipped paint and a crooked cross atop its steeple. Its windows were dark, save for a faint flicker of candlelight seeping through the stained glass. She stopped at the steps, her boots crunching on the frost-dusted concrete, and set the basket down with trembling hands. For a moment, she hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket, her breath catching in her throat. Then she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing down the empty street until they were swallowed by the distant wail of a freight train rolling through the night. The church door creaked open minutes later, pushed by a gnarled hand wrapped in a wool glove. Father Daniel stepped out, his gray hair catching the dim light, his face etched with lines that told stories of too many confessions and not enough sleep. He squinted into the darkness, his breath fogging the air, and nearly tripped over the basket. His eyes widened as he knelt, pulling back the blanket to reveal the sleeping infant. A note was pinned to the fabric, scrawled in shaky handwriting, "Please take care of her." He muttered a prayer under his breath, scooped up the basket, and shuffled back inside, the door thudding shut behind him. The wind picked up, rattling the bare trees lining Elm Street, and the town settled back into its usual silence. 20 years later, Emily Harper stood behind the counter at the Dollar General on West 12th Street, scanning a can of SpaghettiOs for a guy in a Steelers jacket who smelled like motor oil and regret. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the chipped linoleum floor. She was 35 now, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her eyes carrying the kind of tired that didn't wash away with coffee. The store was quiet, save for the hum of the heater rattling in the corner and the occasional beep of the scanner. Outside, the afternoon was fading into a gray dusk, the kind of day where the clouds seemed to press down on the town like a lid. Emily didn't look up much, didn't need to. She knew every face that came through here. The single moms with coupons, the old guys buying lottery tickets, the kids sneaking candy bars into their pockets. It was the same every day, a loop she couldn't break out of. "Hey, you got any more of them discount smokes?" the guy asked, scratching at his stubble. Emily shook her head, barely glancing at him. "Sold out yesterday. Try the gas station on Peach." He grunted, shoved a crumpled $10 bill across the counter, and shuffled out, the bell above the door jingling as he left. Emily stuffed the cash into the register and leaned on her elbows, staring at the rack of gum by the counter. She'd been here 6 years. 6 years of minimum wage and sore feet, 6 years since she stopped dreaming about anything better. Her apartment was a mile away, a third-floor walk-up in a building that smelled like mildew and regret. It wasn't much, but it was hers, paid for with every overtime shift she could snag. The bell jingled again, snapping her out of her daze. Tara, her coworker, breezed in, shaking snow off her coat and carrying a stack of mail she'd grabbed from the box out front. Tara was younger, maybe 25, with bleached blonde hair and a laugh that could cut through the store's gloom like a knife. "You look like death warmed over," Tara said, tossing the mail onto the counter. "Rough night." Emily forced a half-smile. "Just the usual. Couldn't sleep." Tara snorted. "You need a man or a dog, something to keep you company. Here, this one's yours." She slid a plain white envelope across the counter. No return address, just Emily's name in neat black ink. Emily frowned, picking it up. "Probably another bill," she muttered, but her stomach twisted as she ran her thumb over the paper. It didn't feel like the usual junk, too light, too deliberate. She waited until Tara disappeared into the back to grab a mop before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet, folded once, with a typed message, "You need to come to the church. It's about your past." No signature, no explanation. Just those words, stark and cold against the white. Emily's breath hitched, her fingers tightening on the paper. The church. She hadn't been back to that place on Elm Street since. She shook her head, crumpling the note in her fist. No one knew. No one could know. She'd made sure of it. 20 years of silence, 20 years of burying it so deep she could almost convince herself it never happened. She grabbed a lighter from the counter display, flicked it on, and held the paper to the flame until it curled into ash in the trash can. The smell of burnt ink lingered, sharp and acrid, but it didn't erase the words now seared into her mind. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She clocked out at 7, pulling on her coat, a thrift store find with a busted zipper, and stepped into the cold. The snow had picked up, fat flakes drifting down onto the cracked pavement. She walked home, her boots crunching against the slush, the sound blending with the rumble of a passing semi on the highway nearby. Her building was a faded beige box, the kind of place where the heat only worked half the time and the stairs creaked like they were about to give up. She climbed to the 3rd floor, her legs heavy, and fumbled with her keys until the lock clicked open. Inside, the apartment was dim, lit only by the orange glow of a street lamp sneaking through the blinds. It smelled faintly of damp carpet and the leftover soup she'd heated up last night. She kicked off her boots, tossed her coat over a chair, and sank onto the sagging couch. For a while, she just sat there, staring at the wall where a cheap landscape print hung crookedly, a lake scene she'd picked up at a yard sale to make the place feel less empty. Her hands rested in her lap, still cold from the walk, and her mind kept circling back to the letter. The church. Her past. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to shove it down, but the memory clawed its way up anyway. The feel of that basket in her arms, the weight of it, the sound of her own sobbing as she ran. She'd been 15, scared out of her mind, her mom screaming at her to fix it or get out. She'd fixed it, all right. And no one had ever asked questions. Not her mom, not the neighbors, not even herself after a while. Until now. She got up, restless, and crossed to the window. The snow was thicker now, swirling in the wind, catching the light from the street below. Erie stretched out in front of her, a patchwork of dim rooftops and blinking traffic lights. A train horn sounded again, low and mournful, cutting through the quiet. She pressed her forehead to the glass, the cold biting into her skin, and let her breath fog the pain. That's when she saw it, or thought she did. In the reflection, just for a second, a shape flickered behind her. Small, blurry, the outline of a baby in a basket. She spun around, heart slamming against her ribs, but the room was empty. Just the couch, the chair, the silence. She laughed, a shaky, brittle sound, and rubbed her eyes. "You're losing it, Em," she muttered. "Too many late nights." But the unease wouldn't let go. She turned back to the window, staring out at the snow, her reflection staring back, alone, always alone. The letter was gone, burned to nothing, but its words weren't. They gnawed at her, sharp and insistent, like a splinter she couldn't pull out. Who knew? Who could possibly know? She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to shake the chill that had nothing to do with the drafty apartment. The train's wail faded into the distance, leaving only the soft hiss of snow against the glass and the thud of her own heartbeat. She didn't sleep that night, not really, just drifted in and out of a haze, the cry of a baby echoing in her ears, faint and far off, until the phone rang and jolted her awake. The phone's shrill ring cut through the dark, pulling Emily out of the half-sleep she'd been clinging to. She fumbled for it on the coffee table, her fingers clumsy with exhaustion, the screen glowing an unknown number. Her stomach dropped as she pressed it to her ear, the silence on the other end thick and heavy. Then came the breathing, slow, deliberate, like someone holding back words. Before she could speak, a faint cry broke through, a baby's wail, sharp and desperate, rising and falling until the line went dead. She stared at the phone, her breath shallow, the room suddenly too small, too quiet. She hit redial, but the number wouldn't connect, just a flat tone, like it had never existed. She tossed the phone onto the couch and ran her hands through her hair, tugging at the roots as if that could yank the sound out of her head. It was nothing, she told herself. A prank, a wrong number, some kid messing with her. But the cry lingered, threading through her thoughts like a needle, stitching together memories she'd spent 20 years unraveling. Morning came slow and gray, the snow piling up outside, blanketing Erie in a hush that made the world feel smaller. Emily stood at her kitchen counter, nursing a mug of instant coffee that tasted more like regret than caffeine. The apartment was cold, the radiator clanking uselessly in the corner, and she hadn't bothered turning on the lights. The phone sat where she'd left it, screen dark, taunting her. She couldn't shake the call, couldn't shake the letter, couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in. She dumped the coffee down the sink, the brown sludge swirling against the chipped porcelain, and grabbed her coat. She needed answers, needed to prove it was nothing, that she could still keep the past where it belonged. The walk to Elm Street was a slog, the snow soaking through her boots, the wind biting at her face. The town was waking up slow, cars crunching through slush, a plow scraping down Main, the neon sign at the diner flickering "Open" in red. She kept her head down, hands shoved deep in her pockets, the letters' words looping in her mind. You need to come to the church. It's about your past. By the time she reached the church, her nose was red and her fingers numb. The building looked the same as it had 20 years ago. Squat and sturdy, the brick faded to a dull brown, the steps worn smooth by decades of feet. She hesitated at the bottom, her breath fogging in the air, her eyes tracing the spot where she'd left the basket. The memory hit hard, her hands shaking, the blanket catching on her sleeve, the sound of her own sobbing as she ran. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it away, and climbed the steps. Inside, the air was warm and thick with the smell of wax and old wood. The pews were empty, the stained glass casting muted colors across the floor, reds and blues dulled by the overcast sky. Father Daniel was at the altar, arranging hymnals, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked up as the door creaked shut behind her, his face creasing into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see anyone this early," he said, setting the books down. "Something on your mind?" Emily swallowed, her throat tight, and stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under her weight. "I got a letter," she said, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. "Said to come here. About something from a long time ago. You know anything about it?" He studied her for a moment, his gaze steady, like he was looking through her instead of at her. "A letter," he repeated, nodding slowly. "I see." He gestured to a pew. "Sit, if you'd like. Warm up a bit." She didn't move, her hands curling into fists in her pockets. "I don't need to sit. I need to know who sent it. Was it you?" Father Daniel sighed, brushing a hand over his gray hair, and shook his head. "No, Emily. It wasn't me. But I think I know why you're here." Her heart stuttered at her name. How did he know her name? And she took a step back. "You've got the wrong person," she said, the words tumbling out too fast. "I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't flinch, just kept that calm, steady look, the kind that made her feel like a kid caught lying. "You left something here," he said quietly. 20 years ago, on a night a lot like this one. It's come back. The air went still, the words landing like a punch she didn't see coming. She opened her mouth to deny it, to tell him he was crazy, but nothing came out. Her chest tightened, her pulse hammering in her ears, and all she could see was that basket, that blanket, that tiny face she'd never let herself remember. "You're wrong," she managed finally, her voice cracking. I've never." She turned and bolted, the door banging shut behind her as she stumbled back into the snow. The cold hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop, half running, half staggering down Elm Street until the church was out of sight. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her boots slipping on the ice, her mind a mess of panic and denial. He knew. He knew. How could he know? She'd never told a soul, not her mom, not her friends, not even herself after a while. She'd buried it, locked it away, and now it was clawing its way out. By the time she got home, her coat was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, and her hands shook as she fumbled with the keys. Inside, she slammed the door and leaned against it, sliding to the floor, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She sat there for a long time, the radiators clanked the only sound, her mind spinning. She needed to think, needed to figure this out, but all she could do was feel, the cold of that night, the weight of the basket, the ache in her chest she'd carried ever since. She dragged herself up eventually, crossing to the bedroom, a cramped little space with a mattress on the floor and a dresser she'd found curbside. She yanked open the bottom drawer, shoving aside old sweaters and a pair of jeans she'd outgrown, until her fingers hit something hard, a shoebox, taped shut, shoved to the back where she wouldn't have to see it. She pulled it out, her hands trembling, and peeled the tape off with her nails. Inside was a photo, creased and faded, tucked under a baby's sock she didn't remember keeping. It was her, 15 years old, skinny and scared, sitting on her mom's old couch with a newborn cradled in her arms. Her face was blotchy from crying, her hair a mess, but she was smiling, a shaky, fragile thing that didn't match the fear in her eyes. She couldn't look at it long, couldn't let herself feel it, but she couldn't put it back either. She set it on the dresser, the sock beside it, and sank onto the mattress, her head in her hands. The memory came anyway, her mom's voice, sharp and furious, echoing through their old house on Cherry Street. "You think you can just ruin us like this? You fix it, Emily, or you're out. I'm not raising some bastard kid." She'd fixed it, all right, snuck out after dark, left the baby where someone would find her, told herself it was better that way. Better for who? She didn't know anymore. She didn't hear the knock at first, lost in the haze of it all, but it came again, louder, insistent. She wiped her face, shoving the photo under a pillow, and dragged herself to the door. When she opened it, a guy stood there, 20-ish, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that looked too familiar, too much like hers. He was bundled in a beat-up jacket, snow dusting his shoulders, his breath fogging in the hall's dim light. "Emily Harper?" he asked, his voice rough, like he'd been yelling or crying or both. She nodded, barely, her throat too tight to speak. He stared at her, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides. "Name's Jake," he said finally. "We need to talk about the church. I know who you are." Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her hand gripping the knob so tight her knuckles whitened. Jake's words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting through the dull hum of the radiator behind her. The hallway light flickered, casting shadows across his face, those eyes, too familiar, too much like the one she saw in the mirror every day. Snowflakes melted on his jacket, dripping onto the worn carpet, and the cold draft from the open door snaked into the apartment, curling around her legs. She wanted to slam the door, to lock him out, to pretend this wasn't happening, but her body wouldn't move. "What do you mean, you know who I am?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking on the last word. Jake shifted, shoving his hands into his pockets, his jaw tight like he was holding something back. "Can I come in? It's freezing out here, and this isn't quick." His breath fogged in the dim light, and for a second, she saw the kid he must have been, small, scared, lost. She stepped aside, reluctant, her boots still damp against the floor as he brushed past her. He smelled like wet wool and gasoline, a faint trace of cigarettes clinging to him. She shut the door, the click loud in the silence, and turned to face him, arms crossed over her chest like a shield. The apartment felt smaller with him in it, the walls pressing in, the air thick with something she couldn't name. He didn't sit, just stood by the couch, his eyes darting around, taking in the sagging cushions, the chipped coffee table, the landscape print hanging crooked on the wall. "Nice place," he said, but there was no warmth in it, just an edge that made her flinch. She didn't respond, didn't know how to. He looked at her then, really looked, and the weight of it pinned her where she stood. "I'm the kid you left," he said, his voice low, steady, like he'd rehearsed it. 20 years ago, at that church on Elm. That was me." The room tilted, the floor dropping out from under her. She grabbed the back of the chair to steady herself, her nails digging into the fabric. "No," she said, shaking her head, the words spilling out before she could stop it. "No, you've got it wrong." "I didn't," she cut herself off, her breath hitching, because the lie tasted sour on her tongue. He didn't blink, didn't back down, just kept staring at her with those eyes, her eyes. "Don't," he said, sharper now. "Don't lie to me. I've got proof. My foster dad, he told me everything before he died. Said they found me in a basket, with a note. Said it was you." Her knees buckled, and she sank into the chair, her hands trembling in her lap. The memory flashed bright and brutal, the snow crunching under her boots, the basket heavy in her arms, the cold biting her fingers as she set it down. She'd whispered, "I'm sorry," into the dark, her voice swallowed by the wind, and then she'd run until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She'd told herself it was over, that no one would ever know. But here he was, standing in her living room, tearing that lie apart. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice small, breaking. I was 15. My mom, she wouldn't let me keep you. I didn't know what else to do. Jake's face twisted, a mix of anger and something softer, something that hurt to look at. Didn't have a choice? He repeated, stepping closer. I was alive, you know that? I wasn't something you could just dump and forget. Did you even think about me? What it'd be like? His voice rose, cracking at the edges, and she flinched, her hands curling into fists. I couldn't, she said, louder now, desperation creeping in. I couldn't keep you. I was a kid myself. I had nothing. They would have taken you anyway, put you in some system. I thought the church would be better. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the walls. Better? You know what it's like growing up knowing nobody wanted you? Bouncing from house to house, wondering why your own mom didn't care enough to stick around. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his shoulders tense. I found out 2 months ago. My foster dad, he was sick, coughing up blood, and he told me. Said he couldn't go without me knowing. Took me half that time to track you down. She stared at him, her chest tight, guilt and fear tangling into something she couldn't breathe through. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't know what happened to you. He spun back, his eyes blazing. You didn't want to know. That's the difference. The words hit like a slap, and she looked away, her gaze landing on the pillow where she'd hidden the photo. She could still feel it, the creased edges, the weight of that moment captured in faded ink. She wanted to show him, to prove she'd cared, even a little, but her arms wouldn't move. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until a knock at the door jolted them both. Emily stood, shaky, and opened it to find Father Daniel, his coat dusted with snow, his face calm but tired. Mind if I come in? He asked, glancing past her to Jake. She nodded, stepping aside, and he walked in, bringing the cold with him. Jake tensed, his eyes narrowing. You know him? He asked her, and she nodded again, mute. Father Daniel set his hat on the table, brushing snow from his sleeves. I figured you two might have met by now, he said, his voice steady. Emily, I tried to tell you this morning. Jake's been coming to the church, asking questions. I thought it best you hear it from him. He looked at Jake, then back at her. But there's more to it. I'd hoped to ease you into this. Emily's stomach twisted, her hands clammy. Ease me into what? She asked, her voice barely audible. Father Daniel sighed, his eyes soft with something like pity. Let's sit, he said, gesturing to the couch. This isn't easy for any of us. She didn't want to sit, didn't want to hear it, but Jake moved first, dropping onto the couch with a thud, his arms crossed. She followed, perching on the edge of the chair, her heart pounding. Father Daniel stayed standing, his hands clasped in front of him. Jake's right, he said. He's the child you left. I was the one who found him that night, took him in, made sure he went to a good family. But Emily, I need you to listen. There's something else you don't know. She shook her head, panic rising. No, I can't do this. She stood, backing toward the door, her breath coming fast. Jake shot up too, his face hard. You don't get to run from this, he snapped. Not again. Father Daniel raised a hand, gentle but firm. Please, Emily. You need to hear this, for both your sakes. She froze, caught between them, the room spinning. She sank back into the chair, her hands gripping the arms, and nodded once, sharp and reluctant. Father Daniel took a breath, his voice low. I tried to help you both today, but it's bigger than this. Emily, you need to come back tomorrow. There's more to your story, more than even Jake knows. The words landed like stones, sinking deep. She looked at Jake, his face a storm of anger and confusion, then back at Father Daniel. What do you mean more? She asked, her voice trembling. He didn't answer, just picked up his hat and moved to the door. Tomorrow, he said. I'll explain then. It's not just about you. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving a silence that pressed against her skin. Jake stood, pacing once, then stopped, staring at her. "What the hell's he talking about?" he demanded. She didn't know, couldn't know, but the dread pooling in her gut told her it wasn't good. The phone rang again, sharp and sudden, and they both flinched, the sound slicing through the quiet like a warning. The phone kept ringing, its shrill tone bouncing off the walls, but Emily didn't move. Neither did Jake. They stood there, locked in a silent standoff, the air between them thick with unspoken accusations and the echo of Father Daniel's words. The ringing stopped, leaving a hollow quiet that felt heavier than the sound. Jake ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping, the fight draining out of him for a moment. "You gonna answer that?" he asked, his voice rough, but she shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. She couldn't, not after last night, not with that cry still rattling around in her skull. He muttered something under his breath and sank back onto the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the coffee table like it held answers. Emily stayed where she was, her arms wrapped tight around herself, the cold from the open door still clinging to her skin. She wanted him gone, wanted to crawl into bed and pull the covers over her head until this all disappeared, but she knew it wouldn't. Not now. Sleep didn't come easy that night. She lay on her mattress, the springs creaking under her weight, the photo of her younger self still tucked under the pillow where she'd left it. The wind howled outside, rattling the window, and every gust sounded like footsteps, like someone coming for her. She kept seeing Jake's face, those eyes, her eyes, twisted with anger and hurt. And Father Daniel's voice, calm but heavy, promising more she didn't want to hear. By the time the sky turned a dull gray, she was up, pulling on her coat, her boots, her resolve. She had to go back to the church. Had to know what he meant, even if it broke her. The snow had thickened overnight, blanketing Erie in a white hush, the streets empty save for a plow scraping down Elm. The church looked smaller in the daylight, its brick dulled by the overcast sky, the cross atop the steeple leaning slightly to the left. She climbed the steps, her boots slipping on the ice, her breath fogging in the frigid air. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wall, the scent of wax and old hymnals wrapping around her. Father Daniel was there, near the altar, lighting candles with a long match, the flame flickering in the dim light. He turned as she approached, his face softening, though his eyes carried a weight she hadn't noticed before. "You came," he said, setting the match down. "I wasn't sure you would." "I didn't want to," she admitted, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "But I need to know. What you said last night, what's bigger than this?" He gestured to a pew, and this time she sat, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her coat still on like she might bolt any second. He took the pew across from her, the wood creaking under his weight, and leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. "Emily," he started, his voice low, careful, "when you left that basket here 20 years ago, I found it. I told you that. Took Jake to a family I knew would care for him. But there's something I didn't tell you, something I didn't know how to say until now." Her stomach twisted, a cold dread creeping up her spine. "What?" she asked, barely a whisper. He took a breath, his eyes meeting hers, steady and sad. "You didn't leave one baby that night. You left 2. Twins." The words didn't register at first, just hung there, meaningless, until they crashed into her like a wave. She shook her head, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. "No," she said, louder than she meant. "No, that's impossible. I'd know. I'd remember." But even as she said it, doubt clawed at her, memories of that night blurring at the edges. Panic, pain, her mom's voice screaming over the chaos. Father Daniel didn't flinch. "You were young, scared. It was a hard birth. I heard later from a nurse who'd seen you at the clinic, off the books. You passed out after the first. They didn't tell you about the second, and your mother. She made sure it stayed quiet. Took the other one before you woke up, left her with me too." Emily's breath came fast, shallow, her chest tightening until she couldn't get air. "Her?" she choked out, and he nodded. "A girl. I found homes for both, Jake with one family, her with another. But she didn't make it. Died in a car accident when she was 5. I only found out years later." The world spun, the pews tilting, the candles blurring into streaks of light. Emily slid to her knees, the floor cold against her palms, a sob tearing out of her so raw it echoed off the walls. Ugh. She'd had 2 babies, lost 2 babies, and she'd never known. Never felt it. She pressed her forehead to the wood, tears pooling on the floor, her hands clawing at nothing. I killed them, she gasped, the words spilling out between sobs. I killed them both. Footsteps sounded behind her, quick and uneven, and she looked up to see Jake in the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wide. He'd heard. How long had he been there? And the sight of him broke her all over again. He crossed the room, dropping beside her, his hands hovering like he didn't know what to do. You didn't know, he said, his voice rough, unsteady. You didn't kill anyone. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, unable to look at him. I left you. I left her. I didn't even feel her. Father Daniel knelt too, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Emily, you were a child yourself. You did what you could with what you had. This isn't your fault. But it didn't help. The guilt was a weight crushing her, years of it piling up in seconds. The door banged open again, shattering the moment, and Mrs. Linda stormed in, her coat flapping, her face twisted with righteous fury. She was the neighbor from downstairs, the one who'd always watched Emily with narrowed eyes, whispering to the other tenants about that quiet girl who keeps to herself. Now she pointed a trembling finger, her voice shrill. I knew it. I heard everything, abandoning babies, letting them die. You're a monster, Emily Harper, and I'm telling everyone. Emily flinched, curling into herself, but Jake shot to his feet, stepping between them. Back off, he snapped, his voice hard. You don't know what you're talking about. Linda's eyes widened, then narrowed. Oh, I know plenty. I saw you sneaking around, asking questions. You're part of this, aren't you? Her little secret. She turned toward the door, muttering, the whole town's gonna hear about this. Jake grabbed her arm, not hard, just enough to stop her, and she yanked free, glaring. Don't you touch me. You'll regret this, both of you. She stormed out, the door slamming behind her, the sound reverberating through the church. Emily stayed on the floor, her sobs quieter now, her body shaking. Jake knelt again, closer this time, and after a moment, his hand brushed her arm. Hey, he said, soft, hesitant. Mom. You didn't kill me. I'm here. The word, Mom, hit her like a jolt, and she looked at him, really looked, seeing past the anger to the boy beneath it. Her boy. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and touched his cheek, the first time she'd ever touched him since that night. He didn't pull away, just held her gaze, and something shifted, a crack in the wall between them. Father Daniel stood, stepping back, giving them space. You've got each other now, he said quietly. That's what matters. Emily nodded, barely, her hands still on Jake's face, tears still falling. Linda's threats echoed in her mind, the town's judgment looming, but right then, it didn't matter. Just this, him, did. Jake pulled back after a moment, standing, offering her a hand. She took it, letting him pull her up, her legs unsteady. I'm staying, he said, his voice firm. But what now? What do we do about her? He jerked his head toward the door Linda had stormed through. Emily wiped her face, her breath ragged but slowing. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what comes next. Outside, the snow kept falling, the wind howling louder, and the church bells began to toll, low and steady, a sound that felt like it could carry them forward, or bury them deeper. The church bells faded into the wind, their echoes swallowed by the snowstorm raging outside. Emily stood there, her hands still tingling from where she'd touched Jake's face, her breath uneven but steadier than before. He lingered close, his presence solid in a way she hadn't expected, his eyes searching hers for something she wasn't sure she could give. The air in the church felt heavy, thick with wax and dust and the weight of everything they'd just uncovered. Father Daniel watched them from a few steps away, his hands clasped, his face calm but lined with a quiet sorrow. Linda's threats hung over them like a storm cloud, but for now, the world was just this room, the three of them, caught in a fragile pause. Jake broke the silence first, his voice low, almost cautious. You okay? He asked, shoving his hands into his pockets like he didn't know what else to do with them. Emily nodded, though it wasn't true, not really. Her chest ached, her mind spinning with images of a little girl she'd never known, a life snuffed out before it could begin. "I don't know what I am," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "But I'm here." He gave a small nod, his jaw tight, and looked toward the door. "She's gonna talk. That lady, Linda. People here." "Let her," Father Daniel said, stepping closer. "Truth's out now. You can't stop it, but you can face it. Together, if you want." Emily glanced at him, then at Jake, the word "together" settling into her like a stone. She'd been alone so long, alone with her guilt, her silence, her small, empty life, that the idea of facing anything with someone else felt foreign, impossible. But Jake was here, real and breathing, and that changed something. "Come back to my place," she said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "We can talk. Figure this out." Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, okay." The walk home was quiet, the snow crunching under their boots, the wind tugging at their coats. Erie was a blur of white, the streetlights glowing faint halos through the storm. Jake kept pace beside her, his shoulders hunched, his breath fogging in the cold. She stole glances at him, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his nose, pieces of herself she hadn't seen in years. Her apartment building loomed ahead, its beige bulk half lost in the snow, and they climbed the stairs in silence, the creak of the steps loud in the stillness. Inside, the air was stale, the radiator clanking weakly, but it was warm enough. She kicked off her boots, tossed her coat over the chair, and gestured to the kitchen. "You hungry? I've got stuff for meatloaf or something." He shrugged, peeling off his jacket and hanging it on the doorknob. "Sure. Meatloaf's good." She nodded, grateful for something to do, and pulled ground beef from the fridge, a loaf of bread from the counter. The kitchen was tiny, barely room for two, but he hovered near the table, watching her work. She mixed the meat with breadcrumbs and an egg, her hands moving on autopilot, the familiar motions grounding her. "Never thought I'd be doing this," she said, half to herself, half to him. "Cooking for you." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Never thought I'd be here. Eating it." They sat at the table later, the meatloaf steaming between them, mashed potatoes from a box heaped on chipped plates. The smell filled the room, warm, simple, homey in a way her place never felt. She picked at her food, her appetite gone, but watched him eat, his fork moving steady and sure. "Where'd you grow up?" she asked, breaking the quiet. He swallowed, set his fork down. "Couple hours west, Youngstown. Foster folks were okay. Worked hard, didn't talk much. Dad fixed cars, Mom sewed. Died last year, both of 'em, cancer." He said it flat, like he'd made peace with it, but his eyes flickered with something else. "I fix cars too. Wanna open a shop someday." She nodded, filing it away. Youngstown, cars, a dream. "My mom's gone too," she said. "Heart attack, 5 years back. She made me do it, you know. Said I'd ruin us if I kept you. Didn't give me a choice." Her voice cracked, and she looked down, tracing the edge of her plate with her thumb. Jake was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward. "She sounds like a piece of work. But you could have fought her. You didn't." It wasn't cruel, just true, and it stung all the same. "I was scared," she whispered. "I didn't know how." The meal stretched on, the conversation halting but real, bits of their lives spilling out over the table like crumbs. He told her about school fights and a dog he'd loved. She told him about the Dollar General, the years of nothing. When the plates were empty, he helped her wash up, the clink of dishes a soft rhythm against the storm outside. They moved to the couch after, sitting at opposite ends, the silence settling back in. She wanted to ask more, about his life, his pain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stared at the wall, the crooked landscape print mocking her with its stillness. "I should have kept you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Both of you." Jake shifted, his knee brushing the cushion between them. "You didn't know about her. Don't beat yourself up over what you didn't know. She shook her head, tears pricking her eyes. I should have felt it. A mother's supposed to feel it. He didn't argue, just sat there, letting her words hang. The quiet stretched, warm and heavy, until a knock rattled the door, sharp, insistent, cutting through the moment. It was Mrs. Linda again, her face flushed, her coat dusted with snow. I told him, she said, her voice loud enough for the hall to hear. Whole building knows now, church folks too. You can't hide this. Emily stood, her heart sinking, but Jake was faster, stepping between them. Get out, he said, his tone cold. You've done enough. Linda smirked, backing off. This ain't over, she snapped, and disappeared down the stairs. Emily sank back onto the couch, her hands shaking. They'll hate me, she murmured. Jake sat beside her, closer now. Let em. We'll deal with it. The next day, she went to the church again, Jake at her side. Father Daniel had called a meeting. Parishioners packed the pews, their whispers buzzing like flies. Linda stood near the front, arms crossed, triumphant. Emily's stomach churned, but Jake squeezed her hand, a small, steady pressure. She stepped forward when Father Daniel nodded, her voice trembling as she spoke. You've heard things. They're true. I left my son, Jake, here 20 years ago. I had a daughter too, didn't know it, and she's gone. I'm sorry. I've been sorry every day since. The room went quiet, the weight of it pressing down, until someone clapped, slow, then louder, others joining in. Not everyone, but enough. Linda huffed, stormed out, but Emily didn't care. She'd faced it. Later, they drove to a cemetery outside town, a small plot with a stone too tiny for the grief it held. Emily knelt, setting daisies on the grave, her daughter's grave, her tears mixing with the snow. I didn't know you, little one, she whispered. But I love you. Forgive me. Jake stood beside her, silent, his hand on her shoulder. The bells tolled again as they walked away, the sound carrying them into whatever came next, together.
Thank you for spending time with our heroes. Share your thoughts in the comments if this story resonated with your heart. Like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss other touching stories. Share this video with your friends. It might inspire something important.